Welcome. I'm Steve Rader Ginsburg. I'm the Executive and Artistic Director here at Field Arts and Events Hall. And on behalf of the board and staff, we'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Klallam, Nisquallam, meaning strong people, who are the original and traditional peoples of this land. We honor their ancestors, past, present, and future. Over the past few weeks, we've been going through historic event after event, soft opening and grand opening. We just recently had our season opener, and tonight this is the first ever and inaugural First Fed community conversation with Dr. Alvy Ray Smith. Yeah, quite a remarkable man. Tonight's program is free to the public, and it's free for a program that we call Pay It Forward. Pay It Forward are events that are free of charge, made possible by prior gifts of generosity. If you'd like to support the Pay It Forward series, the more supporters we have, the more of these free experiences there are. So please donate online and specify Pay It Forward. And a special thank you tonight to Joe Floyd and Barbara Noble, who believe in the importance of community dialogue, ideas, and inspired conversations, for their support of this evening's First Fed community conversation. Thank you. Anybody here for your first time this evening? All right, that's quite a few people, so welcome. We really welcome you here tonight. Field Arts and Events Hall is very proud to have designed and built this wonderful facility for Port Angeles and the surrounding community, with a theater, conference center, and event center, coffee bar, and gallery. Please sign up for our mailing list and like us on whatever social media platform you're on. And we are still in our capital campaign. So please consider making a donation to that by purchasing a naming right to these seats, one of the seats that you're sitting in, or a gift of any type, and you can find that online. So we would not be here tonight also without the forward thinking and the generosity of First Fed. It's my honor to introduce Matt Dynas, CEO of First Fed, a 100-year-old publicly traded bank that's founded right here in Port Angeles. Matt's also a good friend, board member, and a board member of Field Hall. Please welcome to the stage, Matt Dynas.
Steve, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for joining us. When we first started talking about working with Field Hall, this was actually an idea that Steve had about doing these types of community conversations. We want the hall to be for all, and we want people to be able to use it for all different types of activities, speakers, community events, town halls, and this is one of those nights and one of those opportunities. And you are in for such a treat. Our first speaker for the community conversations is Dr. Alvy Ray Smith. Alvy co-founded two successful startups, one of which I know all of us know and love quite well, Pixar Pictures, which sold to Disney, and Altamira, which sold to Microsoft. He worked as the first director of computer graphics at Lucasfilm, which obviously is known for all the Star Wars series, Indiana Jones, and many others. He joins us tonight for our first conversation. He was an original member of the Computer Graphics Lab at the New York Institute of Technology and the first graphics fellow at Microsoft. He worked at Xerox PARC for the birth of the personal computer, the internet, and some of the earliest color pixels. Dr. Smith has received 2 Technical Academy Awards for the Alpha Channel and Digital Paint Systems. He invented the first color paint program and the HSV or HSB color transform and co-invented the Alpha Channel. In 2021, Dr. Smith published a book, A Biography of the Pixel, with MIT Press. Copies of his book are available for purchase during this event out in the lobby, and Dr. Smith will be signing copies after the talk. I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Dr. Alvy Ray Smith.
Hello, everybody. Let me see if I can see better with these on. Indeed, I can. So they go on. What you see on the screen there is, I think of it as the birth of human art. It may not quite be the birth, but it's certainly way back then. This is a cave painting in Altamira Cave in northern Spain. The age is not exactly certain, but it's at least 15,000 years ago and probably more like 20 or 30,000 years ago. What's awesome to me is the careful rendering of colors. It's not a just simple pictograph, it's a fully rendered representation of an animal. And not only that, but it's apparently the artist tried to make it look like it was moving. So I used Photoshop to take this apart into two frames to see if it actually did animate, and it does. Kind of amazing, since they didn't have any shutters back 20,000 years ago in this cave. So the flickering fire maybe worked, but I don't really think flickering fire quite does it. Anyhow, first animation, for surely it's the first animation. And the reason I have that up there is to get you thinking about the moment when we could separate. Stop moving. Paintings and their medium used to be inseparable. This painting and the ochre paints and the carbon and the cave wall were one thing. You couldn't imagine taking the picture off of that cave wall. And one more picture I want to show you, because it's my tribute to my uncle George Gray in New Mexico, who taught me how to oil paint when I was a kid. And this, even though this was in the 1950s, let's say, it's oil on masonite board or something like that. Again, how do you separate the painting from the medium? We didn't even think to ask that question then. But something major has happened in our lifetimes, and it's what I wrote my book about, because I think it was a big deal and it kind of went by and nobody noticed. It's the moment when we separated the picture from the medium, made it free. And the device that made that possible is the pixel. And I'll get into that. Everybody thinks a pixel's a trivial idea, but it's not. It's profound. Okay. That's the book that I spent 10 years writing. Why did it take so long? It's a surprise to me, because I thought I knew all I had to do was just sit down and write the history. But it turns out every time I looked in, I started to write, say, the history of movies, or the history of color pixels, or the history of television. I said, I know that stuff. I can just sit down and write it down. Check the books. Well, it turns out every time I looked into the real history of things, I found out that the received version that I had received was bogus. And it turned out to be the story again and again and again. And I realized this is kind of a theme. We think we know these stories, and we don't. Somehow they get established into the received wisdom world, and they're just taken for granted, even though they're not true. So one of the things I wanted to do was establish the canon of official stories that go with the notion of what I call digital light. Now, digital light is really easy to define. It's any picture made of pixels. Now, if you think about it, that's most pictures that exist in the world today. And in fact, because of the digital explosion, nearly all pictures that have ever existed are now in the form of pixels and are part of digital light. That only happened in about the year 2000. So what I'm going to describe is that big event and some of the players who made it happen. And out of that comes what I've done and a lot of what you enjoy doing every day. To tell the story, I have to step back to this man, Joseph Fourier, the man on the left. The guy on the right, it's a silly picture of Napoleon. I'll bring him up in a moment. That's a kind of a flattering picture of Fourier. He probably looked more like that, actually. How many people, just a show of hands, how many people have ever heard of Fourier, Joseph Fourier? Okay, there's a sprinkling out there. Basically, anybody who's in technology of any sort probably uses Fourier every day, or in statistics, or in quantum mechanics. Fourier came up with a theory that I'm going to describe to you that I summarize as everything is music. We're all aware that music is a sum of sound waves at different frequencies and different amplitudes. Or sometimes we call it frequency pitch, but it's the same thing. Fourier said, no, it's not just music, it's all sound is a sum of frequencies. And those are the kind of waves that he was talking about. You know this wave, it's the shape of the voltage that comes out of every AC socket in your house. It's called a sine wave by mathematicians, but I avoid math in this book. It's a wave, that wave. And if you extrude that wave out of the screen and then look down on it, you see that. And those are the two-dimensional waves, Fourier waves, whereas the ones on the preceding slide were one-dimensional Fourier waves. Sound is a sum of one-dimensional Fourier waves. Pictures are a sum of 2D, two-dimensional Fourier waves. So believe it or not, every picture can be represented as a sum of these waves. It's not at all obvious. I guess one of the things I'd like to get across is, I like to talk about art. There's an art in mathematics as well. Some of the theorems that drive the modern world are just gorgeous, and they're not obvious at all. Fourier's theory that everything is music is not obvious at all. In fact, he was attacked most of his life. Let's talk about his life. I'll back up to this guy. Fourier lived he was in the French Revolution. In fact, he was a rebel, and he got thrown in prison, and he was due to get his head guillotined. And he was saved at the last minute by Robespierre getting his head guillotined instead, and our guy escaping, at which point he ran off with his new buddy, Napoleon Bonaparte, to Egypt. And he was in the crew of people that discovered the Rosetta Stone. But he also saw all the military mistakes that Napoleon made in Egypt. Napoleon goes off to France to lead France, to become the leader of France, and the last thing he wanted was this loudmouth Joseph Fourier in Paris telling everybody what really happened in Egypt. So Napoleon did this clever thing. He made Fourier the governor of a province, the prefect of a prefecture, actually, but the one where Grenoble's located. Hundreds of miles away from Paris. Fourier knew he was in exile. He was the only great scientist not in Paris during this period. And he only got to go back to Paris when Napoleon finally got shipped off to St. Helena. Then Fourier comes into Paris, takes over the French Academy, finally gets his theory accepted, promotes Sophie Germain, one of the great women mathematicians, comes up with the greenhouse effect. This guy, 1800 or so, came up with the greenhouse effect. What a surprise. Now, I had grown up educated in technology, and I knew Fourier theory inside and out, but I didn't know a thing about this guy. It's a pretty good story. All right. The reason I tell you about that theory is because I'm approaching what a pixel is. And that invokes this guy. Every country claims to have the person who invented the sampling theorem, which is what I'm about to describe to you. I was educated to think it was Claude Shannon. No, it wasn't Claude Shannon. I sat down to write the history of sampling theorem. I looked up Claude Shannon, he never even claimed he did it. He said, it was just in the air. And the reason he didn't write down who actually did it, because it was this guy who was a commie, a Russian communist. His name is Vladimir Kotelnikov. And that's him on the left when he proved this famous theorem that our whole pixel world is based on. And that's him on the right when he was an old man, about 93. He's standing in the Kremlin. He's being knighted or some equivalent in Russia. The full picture has Putin standing next to him. And I used to show that, and it's in the book, but I cropped it out. I can't stand putting Putin up on the screen anymore. And you might think, oh, well, it's the Russians, they lie about the science. That's just, no, this guy is bona fide. He comes from a long line of mathematicians all the way back to the great Euler. And his stuff is no-nonsense mathematics. Good to the hill, right to the hill. It's great stuff. What is it? He said, that's the original paper, by the way, 1933 in Russian. I can't read it. I want you just to look at that, what's in the ellipse there, the hump with the ripples off to the side. I'm going to call that a spreader, and you'll see why in a moment. That's a one-dimensional spreader. The two-dimensional version looks kind of like this little mountain. If you guillotine that little mountain and look at the cross-section, it's a hump with ripples off to the side. Okay, what Kotelnikov said, and this is as technical as I'm going to get tonight, is if you sample a picture at a certain frequency, you can throw away all the rest of the picture except at the samples. Okay, think about it this way. Think of a picture as being a crumpled sheet where the heights of the rumples are the brightnesses of the picture. And then think about a bed of nails down below here, equally spaced bed of nails, equally spaced in both dimensions. And we let this sheet fall on those nails and only preserve the points in the picture that land on the nails. That's the samples that I've been talking about here. There's a picture of one red there. We have a name for those samples. Pixel. That's a pixel. One thing it is not is that. You notice when I was telling you about this little hump and all that, I never used a little square even once. Pixels have never been little squares. It's one of the most widely held mistakes in the world. They've never been little squares. And I think the reason people think of pixels as little squares is because they were early associated with computers, and people thought computers were hard and rigid and mathematical, and that's probably what pictures should look like if a computer does it. But it's just not true. It turns out that computers are the most subtle tools that humankind has ever invented. And, well, let me make the point. A pixel only exists at a point. You can't see a point. You learned that in high school geometry. I did. Pixel has 0 dimensions. You can't see it. How do you see it? You spread it out with a spreader. And how do you spread it? Well, you know those little glowy spots on the surface of your phone or on your laptop or your TV set? Those little glowy spots kind of have that shape. Those are the spreaders. All right, here's another point. My phone has billions of pixels in it. Can't see them, right? They're stored away in files. You can't see pixels. You can only see them when you decide to spread them with the little glowy spots, which aren't pixels, by the way. It's a misnomer to call those things on a screen pixels. They're display elements or some such word. So what that allowed us to do was finally separate the picture from the medium. And as you now know, that happened about just 2000, about the year 2000 is when it happened. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is because nobody paid any attention. I said, wait a minute, something really huge just happened. I'd like to tell people about it. I call it the Great Digital Convergence. When all old media types, film, videotape, photographic inks, all of that stuff just disappeared, and were substituted, were replaced by a single medium, the bit. That just happened a few years ago. We can't even remember hardly. There are places to go see the old analog world. One place is museums. Another place is kindergartens. That's kind of fun. You know, there's still a vanishingly small number of non-pixelated pictures around. I don't want to say pixelated. That invokes the picture of the gumball machine. Pictures represented with pixels. There is one more component of our modern world that you all know about already. It's the computer. Now, this is one case where one guy did do it all. He's the guy on the left, Alan Turing. He invented the idea of the stored program computer, which is what we mean by that word today. He invented the idea of computation. He also pretty much invented by himself the notion of artificial intelligence, which is big these days. He did fail once. He went out to make, so the trouble with the early computations were they were very slow. I mean, really slow. Tediously slow, impossibly slow. And he knew that if we couldn't make computation go fast, it was a worthless idea. So he went out to build a hardware version that would go faster. He failed at that. The other guy, the guy in red, is Johnny von Neumann. He was the only other genius in the world who was smart enough to know what Alan Turing had invented. I love this picture, which I got from his daughter, because he's the only guy sitting ass backwards on the edge of the Grand Canyon in a business suit with no hat. He's also one of the smartest human beings who ever lived. And he went out to build one of the first computers and worked away at it. So these two guys kind of kicked it all off. So one of my questions was, where did the first pixels happen? We couldn't really get anywhere in what my world of computer graphics until we had the notion of pixel and the notion of computers. So for this book, I decided to go find the first pixels. The first ones. Where are they? I should know that, shouldn't I? I didn't. I found them on this machine, which turns out to be the very first stored program computer ever built, called Baby, believe it or not. Baby, when I went to visit, had this on its screen. And the word Pixar was animating. It was scrolling to the side. The first computer had the first pixels, and it could animate. 1947. Way before I knew. So I realized the whole history of computer graphics that I understood was wrong. So that's one of the things I try to get right in this book. I went out, this was in England, by the way, Manchester. And while I was there, I found the actual first pixels. Somebody had taken a picture, and this is it. The actual first pixels. There aren't little squares, you notice. And then I looked around a little bit more, and I found perhaps the first game, 1951. Made of pixels, and it's interactive. So there was interactive computer graphics using pixels in 1950, more or less. I thought the received version of computer graphics it started in Utah it started at MIT in about 1963 with a guy named Ivan Sutherland. Ivan Sutherland's story is good, but he did not start it. Okay. What I need to explain now is Moore's Law. This is probably the most graphic, textual picture I have here. We've been talking so far about what I call epic one of computer history. babies down the lower left, 1948. In 1965, I call that Epic One. That was when computers were these giant beasts who, as they got more powerful, they got larger. They were huge. They were room size. They weighed tons. They cost billions. But in 1965, something happened. We call it Moore's Law. It's usually expressed this way. The density of components on an integrated circuit chip will double every 18 months. I don't know about you, but that means nothing to me. So I decided to put it in terms that were intuitive, and this is it. Everything good about computation, about computers, which happens to be directly related to density of components on an integrated circuit chip, but everything good about computers gets better by an order of magnitude. That means a factor of 10 every 5 years. Why did I say order of magnitude instead of factor of 10? Well, that's because we puny humans can't think more than a factor of 10. So we give it a fancy name, order of magnitude. What Moore's Law says is every 5 years we have to go through a reconceptualization because we reach another order of magnitude of capability from computers. Now, Gordon Moore, when he announced this in 1965, which is when I made my first computer graphic image, by the way, said, I think this might last, this might be we call it a law, but it's not really a law. He just said, I think this might be the case for the next 10 years. Well, it's still been going. It's been going 55, 65, 60 years. This curve is known as a hockey stick in business world. It's the curve. It's the profit curve to die for. I just wanted to show you where we are today. If it was a factor of 1, so if Moore's Law was a factor of 1 in 1965, when he stated it, the Moore's Law factor today is now over 100 billion, soon to reach 1 trillion. Couple of years. That means today, everything good about computers is 100 billion times better than it was in 1965 when I made my first picture. We don't even know what that means. That's the other message of Moore's Law is since every 5 years is an order of magnitude, limit of what humans can do, we've exceeded that limit 11 times. No genius, no matter how smart he is, could have told us in 1965 what computers would be doing today. Now, people ask me, what are they going to do in the future? I said, I don't know. That's the point of this law. You can't know. You just have to surf the wave to find out. And that's what we're all doing. My entire career has been surfing this wave, and yours too. And I think the next generation will be on it too. And the reason I think that is because the engineers who are making those denser chips have to ride this curve too. I've heard the death of Moore's Law predicted 5 times in my career. But basically the engineers, when they get to the current level, say, oh, now I see how to go on, push it, make it even denser. And they've done it again and again and again. This might really be the end of Moore's Law, but I don't buy it yet. Okay. All right, I'm going to start to kind of narrow that down to more what I have actually done myself, which is color pixels in animations. This book is not really a history of Pixar, but the history of Pixar is in there. But of course I have to, since I use color pixels, I needed to find where the first color pixels occurred. I should know that, right? I didn't. I thought I knew. I thought we had them at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center in 1973. My colleague, Dick Schaup, said, Alvy, I don't think that's true. I think somebody else has done it, but he couldn't name names. So I went out and started poking around for the purposes of this book, and I found the first color pixels And here they are. In 1967, two engineers at General Electric in upstate New York built a simulator for NASA for the Apollo Moon project. That's what this is. It's a simulator. So not only is it the first color pixels in the world, about 5 years earlier than I guessed, by the way, but it's also the first color renderings by computer graphics of surfaces in 3D perspective. So now I'm going to start making 5-year leaps, order of magnitude leaps. Okay. From that was 65. This is about 72 or so. This is the first color pixels I got to use at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. This is where the desktop computer revolution was occurring. I just happened to be there by one of the greatest pieces of luck in my life, where the Windows-based user interface was introduced, where I was doing color pixels, the net, we call it the Ethernet, was being invented. The mouse was being used for interfacing. The laser printer, the first laser printer, basically computing as we now know it, was being invented then. Okay, the bad part of that story is I got fired, and I went in to say why, and they said, well, we've decided not to do color. And I said, well, wait a minute. I didn't know about the two engineers inside NASA somewhere, and I thought we had the first color pixels. Xerox had the first color. It says, you have the future's color, and you have it. You own it completely. And they said, Alvy, you may be right, but it's a corporate decision to go black and white. So I said, okay, bye. And I went to look for the next color pixels, and I found this rich man on the North Shore of Long Island who had a university of his own called the New York Institute of Technology, which at the time was pretty much a diploma mill. It's reputable now, but at the time it wasn't. But he wanted to, on his camp, by the way, this is one of the buildings on the campus, the Seversky Mansion. He had cobbled together 4 of these wonderful estates on the fabulous North Shore of Long Island, and the mansions on the estates were the buildings on his campus. So this is where we did video. This is our video mansion. If you went through the woods that way to the next mansion, that's where we did computer graphics and so forth. Unbelievable guy. I'm not going to talk about this fellow. This is he, Alexander Schur, one of the 3 people that made Pixar happen, though nobody knows his name. He didn't really know what he was doing, but he did all the right things. I have a role for this guy. I call people like that a tyrant in my book. Napoleon was Fourier's tyrant. Well, here's an example. He came to me one day and he said, Alvy, do we have the best computer graphics in the world? I said, yes, we do. He said, how do we stay there? Which is the right question to ask. And I said, well, if you buy me, okay, I need to back up a minute. At Xerox PARC, we had a frame buffer, which is a memory that holds color pixels. It was the only one in the world. When I got fired from Xerox, I had to find the next frame buffer. This guy had bought it, and it cost him $80,000. That's for 512 by 512 pixels, 8 bits deep. It's maybe a thumbnail piece of your current phone screen. $80,000, $1975. I said, if you buy me 2 more of these 8-bit frame buffers, I can cobble them together to make 24-bit pixels, and we jump from 256 colors to 16 million colors, and then we can do anything. I didn't know whether he got it. He wasn't very technical. Several weeks later, he wanders in and says, oh, I bought you 5 more of those thingies, those 8-bit thingies, so you'd have 2 of those 24-bit thingies. I was young and didn't really understand what an impressive move that was, but I sat down while I was writing this book and did the numbers and put it in modern number terms. And basically what he had done was he had just spent $2 million, today's money, on my say-so. And it put us out in front of everybody else in the world, and we never looked back, and essentially that's where Pixar came from. He got nothing out of it, by the way. His sons took his university away from him, and he got nothing. But these are some of the pictures we made with the first 24-bit pixels. We just went nuts making art, just nuts. Nobody had seen it before. So anyhow. One of the things that happened to me there is I met the guy on the right. I'm the guy on the left, by the way. Ed Imschwiller, and we made a piece called Sunstone that's now in the Museum of Modern Art, one of the pieces I'm most proud of in my life. There was an 18-second segment in there of this exploded cube kind of slowly rotating off into space. And the walls, that lower face of the cube was pulsating. It took us 56 hours to compute this thing, 18 seconds, at 500 by 500 resolution, okay? Computers were really slow. That's why we knew about Moore's Law, but we didn't know what it was going to feel like. Okay, another 5-year leap. We finally figured out the guy at New York Tech didn't have it. So George Lucas came and knocked on our door, and we left. For one thing, it got me back to California, which I wanted. And we went to work. I was head of computer graphics at Lucasfilm, and and I started hiring all these geniuses. Everybody wanted to be in the movies, so when I asked them to join my group, they would say, sure. And I put together this team of just amazing talent, technical talent. And waited for George to come by and ask me to be in his movie. He didn't come. And finally I realized George Lucas doesn't get it. He doesn't know what he has. So Paramount came and hired Industrial Light and Magic, which was George Lucas's special effects house, to do special effects for Star Trek, not Star Wars, but Star Trek. And we did a piece called Genesis Demo. I was the director, and I had this team of geniuses as my crew. It was just a one-minute piece in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And we did the following thing. I brought my crew together, and I said, look, we finally got our big break. We're going to be on the big screen, finally. And we're going to do a good job for Paramount, and we'll make all the Trekkies in the audience really happy with the story. But what this really is a 60-second commercial to George Lucas, so he'll know what the hell he's got. And I knew this thing about George is that he was aware of the camera, always aware of the camera. If you try watching a movie and stay aware of the camera, then the director has failed because you haven't been sucked into the emotion. But George could do both, apparently. And I knew he would, so I said, we're going to put a camera move in this shot that'll blow his socks off. It won't be gratuitous, wowie zowie, computer graphics 101. It'll make sense to the Star Trek story, but it'll be a move that no real camera could possibly do. It'll spin and whirl and do all sorts of things. And sure enough, the day after the premiere, George Lucas stepped just 1 foot into my office, kind of a shy man in my opinion, and he said, great camera move. He got it. He had us in his next movie. And more importantly, he told his good buddy Steven Spielberg about us. And he had us in his next movie. And it started spreading. The word started spreading. Okay, let's leap another 5 years. Somewhere in here we decided we don't want to do special effects for space movies. We want to do character animation. Ed Catmull, who was my partner who co-founded Pixar with me, and I both grew up on Walt Disney's television show. And he had taught us how to do animation. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to bring characters alive, but using the computer to do the rendering. So we decided one year, 1984, would be the year we would announce to the world we did character animation. And this is 4 successive frames out of a piece called Andre and Wally B. I just hired one of the best hires of my life, an animator named John Lasseter, who animated this. And the technical team, this team of geniuses, had solved one problem we had to solve, which we call motion blur. If you sample time and don't take care of the motion blur, it looks like this when you play it back. It judders across the screen and it feels awful. And we knew nobody would ever watch animation if it juddered. Sure enough, our team came up with a brilliant solution. And this was the first piece to show it all. This is 4 successive frames. So you can see how the character is blurred in the direction of motion. And that makes it easy to watch when it's played at full speed. George didn't like it. That same year, we kind of summarized, we'd reached the point where we could actually do everything we needed to do to make a movie, feature-length movie, which was our goal, by the way. The picture on the left is called 1984 for the pool balls. It's completely synthetic. We had solved motion blur, mutual reflection, light, shadows, everything. We had solved it all. And we had a real animator to do the emotion. Okay. So at this point, I just want to state the central dogma that most of all the Pixar's all the movies that have been made so far honor. The central dogma says we will model the world inside our computer using 3-dimensional Euclidean geometry, Newtonian physics, and we will project that world into 2 dimensions using Renaissance perspective. Now, there's nothing about computers that requires those 3 things. Nothing at all. And yet, except for one scene in one movie, all movies so far have been executed in this world. So one of my cries to the artists of the world is break out of the central dogma and show us what else is out there. There's so much more. And here's an example, picture I made before I got into computer graphics, showing non-Euclidean geometry. Non-Renaissance perspective is what I'm really after here. Non-Renaissance perspective. You'll see that straight lines bend and do all sorts of weird stuff. But it works as a piece. I'm particularly proud of this piece because it was used for 41 years as the cover of the Foundations of Computer Science, where the basic papers about computer science were published. All right, now we're going to leap another 5 years to the movie, Toy Story. We finally got there. And by the way, about the same time, 2 other groups arrived. The DreamWorks group did Ants, and the Blue Sky group did Ice Age. And all of these arrived just about when? The millennium. That's why I choose that as sort of the place where it began. And we've been still surfing Moore's Law curve ever since. And I'm going to stop with this picture. This is made by a friend of mine named Darcy Gerbark. She's been painting on paint programs, computer paint programs, since my earliest ones back in the 70s. And I really didn't like her stuff most of the time. We used to argue all the time, about whether it was good or bad or, artistic or whatever. But then she made a change recently. She added VR to it, virtual reality. She took a program called Tilt Brush, which allows you to paint strokes of paint in 3D about you. You can choose the color, you can choose the width, you can choose the texture. Now, these paint strokes are created in the central dogma. In other words, they use Renaissance perspective, they cast shadows on one another, they occupy Euclidean geometry correctly. Then she looks through her VR sculpture at, say, her room or her studio, and finds a view she likes and takes a picture of that, and then brings it all into Photoshop, say, and does stuff to it. Getting, for example, this result, which pulls me in. I love this piece. And all of a sudden I realize she's just done something completely new and outside the central dogma. I mean, some of it's central dogma, but the whole thing is not central dogma. I mean, when you think about it, paint programs basically say you can put anything you want in any pixel. There's no rules. Paint programs are automatically outside the central dogma. So I'm going to stop right there, and I hope I've inspired some of you to ask me some questions.
So much, Dr. Alvy Smith. We are going to move right into a community conversation here. And so we have some ushers with some microphones. They'll be coming out to you so you can ask questions to Dr. Alvy Ray Smith. I want to introduce our moderator, who many of you hopefully know in town. Our moderator is Drew Schwab, who is the owner of the downtown store Anime Cat. He also is full of community involvement, which includes being on a local planning board. He's involved with SquatchCon and serving on the planning commission and also running for city council. So Drew is very civic-minded as well as a pixel connoisseur.
A pixel connoisseur.
Thank you.
I like this.
My name is Christopher Wright, and I've been in film production for a long time.
Film production, okay.
But never got into the animation world. I was wondering, in your company, Pixar, what was your favorite 3D program, or did you use basically all of them, and why?
Well, we rolled our own.
So you didn't like the 3D Studio Max and Lightwave and all that?
For one thing, those didn't exist when we were coming up. So we rolled our own, and what I'm going to get to is RenderMan. We invented this system called RenderMan, which is now kind of the basis of all special effects in Hollywood. That's the result of this development. These guys, Pixar has this group of, well, I've already said, these amazing technical geniuses that just kept producing success after success after success on the technical side to back up the artist on the animation side. Of course, we also had some great artists too. Let me say something about animators. Everybody knows about the great actors of the world. The point I want to make is that the great animators and the great actors have the same skill. And they both agree to that. I've talked to both groups and they agree to that statement I've just made. If you think about it, what does an actor do? An actor convinces you that his or her body is somebody else's completely. And if they're good, they convince you completely. You don't even think about it. They just become that other person. An animator makes you believe that a stack of polygons is conscious and feels pain and is conniving. Is going to outwit the coyote. It's an amazing thing. And without that, none of this works. And by the way, AI is a big subject these days. We haven't a clue how to do what they do, what actors and animators do. Not a clue. They don't know. They just do it. Is that anywhere close to your question? I think it's okay.
Do we have another question? Yeah, it looks like we have one right over here.
Dr. Smith, can you talk a little bit about the Alpha channel? I understand you were instrumental in that.
Yeah,
Can you talk about how
we
that came
invented the
about?
Alpha channel with Ed, my partner Ed. At the time we invented it, we didn't realize it was profound. We just whipped it out to solve a particular problem. And the reason we got to it before anybody else did was, you remember I told you about the guy who bought me 5 more frame buffers when I just asked for 2 more? he eventually bought us 18 more. So we had more memory, color pixel memory in the world than anybody else. And my partner Ed Catmull came to me and said, Alvy, I got this problem. I'm trying to solve this hidden surface problem. I won't go into the details, but he said, sure would be nice if I didn't have to store a picture in my file in order to practice rendering a new three-dimensional object in front of it. And we sat there and we talked. I said, that should be really easy to solve. If you just write the opacity of each pixel in a file, how transparent it is. And I can bring in any arbitrary picture to a frame buffer, and then I can read the opacity as I bring in the pixels from your file, and we'll mix appropriately the new pixel with the pixel that's already in the frame buffer. And we actually use the formula alpha A plus 1 minus alpha B to do the mixing. It could have been a T instead of an alpha, but we used alpha when we were expressing this formula. And so I implemented that overnight. It was easy to do. What I didn't realize, and it took me maybe decades, I'm sort of embarrassed to admit this, but it took me decades to realize how profound the alpha channel is. I mean, it's the basis of all picture composition in the modern world. But I finally got there. Now I realize just how amazing. One of the consequences of the alpha channel is you don't have to have rectangular pictures anymore. They can be any shape.
Do we have another question? Yeah, it looks like we have one over here.
Thank you for that excellent presentation. My name's Charlie.
Oh, there. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
I recently watched a film on Netflix. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of it.
That's my problem, too.
And I don't remember the name of the process that they used. It was a kind of advanced animation. It looked to me as if they had actually taken pictures of actual people, because the facial expressions, the wording of and the use of their lips as they spoke made it easy to forget that you were not watching a real movie. I wish that I could remember the name.
Yeah, I can't help you there, but let me just say, for years there was this sense that there was something about, again, it's this sense that computers are hard and rigid and linear and you can't do human beings. And there's nothing standing in the way of computers doing almost anything. The computation is a very large idea. And my wife Alison Gottmik is in the audience here. She and I met a fellow, I can't remember his name, in New Zealand. It's been 10 years ago, I think, whose specialty was human beings. The realistic rendering of human beings, but not real humans. And he was already showing astonishing results a decade ago, 2 orders of magnitude ago on Moore's Law. And now we've got that extra factor of 100 or maybe 1,000 since then that are starting to make realistic humans almost every day. The first time I realized it had happened and I didn't know it was The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. You remember this movie? The guy lived his life backwards. There were 2 scenes, it starred Brad Pitt. There were 2 scenes in there, I was told, that weren't Brad Pitt. And I said, oh, I'll be able to spot it. Me, I can do that. I couldn't. And I had to have it explained to me and pointed out. They had passed that particular test where, and there's, to me, I can look at Moore's Law and I can see as the resolution goes up, I can see there's really nothing that should keep us from representing a human being. Representing the actor, driving the human being is another thing. I don't see how to do that, but I thought, here's where I should probably mention that I started out in 1965 at Stanford in a new department called computer science. Have you heard of that? First year, that was such a department. And the subject I went there to learn was a really exciting subject called artificial intelligence. 1965. And after a couple of years, I said, Alvy, I don't think this is going to happen in my lifetime. Understanding how this works using the computation model. Why don't you change to something else that you can actually do in your lifetime, like make the first digital movie? But now I've done that, so I'm back to artificial intelligence, which has suddenly become really exciting. And this is where the order of magnitude thing comes in on Moore's Law. Are we going to... The shocker to me about where we are at artificial intelligence now is it suddenly hit me that I'm not going to be able to understand it when we get there. The first glimpse of that was a friend of mine who had written, I call him a pixel packer, he had written filters for Photoshop as his career, approached me in Cambridge, England with a paper. He says, Alvy, we don't have to program anymore. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, read this paper, which happens to come from Berkeley. And it was what I call the zebras and horses paper, where they had taken a particular neural net and trained it on 1,000 pictures of horses, just arbitrary pictures, 1,000 arbitrary pictures of zebras. And after this GAN, it's called a particular kind of neural net, was trained, you could submit to it an arbitrary picture of horses, and it would output that exact same picture, but every horse would be replaced with a zebra, or vice versa. And I went, wait a minute. How did it do that? That's not even a well-defined problem. What's a horse? What's a zebra? He says, that's what I'm trying to tell you, Alvy. We don't know. And it's too hard to reverse engineer it. It just works. And that's the first time I went, oh gosh. I always thought I'd be able to figure it out. But Alan Turing actually told us about how really seriously weird computation would be. And we've kind of avoided it, the really weird parts, until now. But we're there now.
All right. Let's see, we have a gentleman over here.
Hello, my name is Paul. You started to go there, but hope it's not too premature to ask you to wax philosophical about some things here, because you took us through a very iterative process, right? You're a math guy, a computer guy, and you're probably right now like, how did we get here? And you just alluded to the fact that things are kind of taking on a life of their own. So I have one specific question, and I just want you to talk about anything. But how do you know we're not in a simulation? And what is the role? Because AI is sexy right now, but psychedelics are sexy right now. So can you talk about where nature and computation and psychedelics might come together in the next few years?
I think they already have. There's the part of me that's entertained by such questions. There's a part of me that actually gets things done, which doesn't. I guess what I want to say is, I'll come back to the Moore's Law curve, is the only way we know what this is going to be like is just to live it. That's been true since the early days of Moore's Law. A leap of a factor of 1,000 we didn't understand until we got there. The first leap of 1,000 brought us to the ability to make, I think it was 1 million when we made Toy Story. We got to 1 million. Now we knew sooner or later we could do that, but the reality of actually doing it didn't happen until we got there. And as we move up, we can sort of look off in the future and say, well, maybe this will mean we can do such and such. Nobody knew about the internet, what it was going to mean. Nobody knew what the iPhone was going to mean. We just had to get there, and then suddenly we're there, and it becomes part of the world as if it had always been there, but it wasn't. And I think that so-called AI, I think, is a flash in the pan. It's going to give us it's a major new tool for dealing with massive information. and it will make a major effect. There will be major effects of it, but it's not going to take over consciousness. It's not. I don't think we've reached the singularity where the robots are going to take us over. Is that at all what you're talking about? Sure. Yeah. No, I'm not a buyer of that singularity religion.
So if it becomes more and more real, in a similar vein, but how do we keep reality something that we can understand and not be tricked into believing things that we're seeing that awfully seem real?
Well, that's been a problem really of media all along, hasn't it? I mean, forget about AI, just think about Twitter. I mean, the number of lies out there is just astonishing. We haven't got a system yet for separating it out. But you think back about the history of any information tech change, like the printing press is a classic example. The first things to come off the printing press were horrific, just major lies. Poor Marie Antoinette. I think the French Revolution probably came out of that set of lies. don't know it well enough to say that, but maybe. What did we finally do? We came up with the idea of editors and critics and systems where you could somehow get a fix, go to experts that kind of help you find your way through this mass of literature. You didn't just take the word of the guy because it was from a printing press as being true. Right now we're at that stage of the Twitter, of the internet where people are just buying the first thing they see coming off, without any curating at all. It's going to be very important to tell the difference, of course. I'm worried about that. There would be a stretch here where people because we saw it happen already, people started believing everything they saw on the internet. They just believed it because it was on the internet. No.
It looks like we have a question in the back over here.
Hey, really excited to check out the book that you wrote. Something that I think about a lot is books and writing, and just really kind of trying to pose a question about maybe how a written word in a book can compare to something like animation made of pixels, and wondering if you could take that anywhere, something that I've been thinking about a little bit.
I'm not sure what your question was.
How would maybe the comparison, what is the difference between a printed book and an animated film with pixels? And maybe the difference between the printed page and the pixel as you've described. It's an idea that...
I think maybe you're asking is so the printed page is driven by pixels now too, right?
That's what I was...
is that what you're getting at?
I don't think I was... the
way I look at it is the printed page is just another display device.
Okay.
There are no little squares on the printed page either, right? There are things that occur on the printed page made of inks usually that are the spreaders that I showed you that a pixel has to have in order to become visible. But I just think of it as another display device.
Okay, yeah, I think...
But by the way, pixels are a universal concept. The pixels coming from Mars, and the pixels coming from China, and the pixels coming from England are all the same. A pixel is a pixel. Display elements vary from device to device, from reflected light to emitted light devices. Even between devices from the same manufacturer, the display elements are different. Display elements are not at all universal. It's the pixel that's the underlying atomic idea that holds the whole digital world together. Digital light world together is what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a question down here towards the front. Yep. So we have a lady down here in front.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
And we'll have time for about one or two more questions afterwards.
Hi there. I have actually two extremely different questions. One has to do with the Renaissance perspective and how you see it as sort of not exactly bad, but why
not bad, no.
Why wanting to break away from the Renaissance perspective along with the Newtonian blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Well, I think the, all right. Years ago when I give talks like this, there would always be somebody who said, Alvy, is your goal to represent reality? And I went, no. And I kind of get angry because I kept getting that question. I want to make art. I grew up oil painting and stuff like that. But then I realized, most of my colleagues in the computer graphics world, that was their goal, was to represent reality. They wanted a picture of a toaster to look like a toaster. And we got there. And it's the central dogma. Basically, the central dogma, or the Euclidean geometry, Renaissance perspective, and Newtonian physics are models for reality. And if you're going to interface with reality, you kind of need to use the central dogma. For example, there's virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. Mixed reality says we will mix synthetic pictures with pictures that we extract from the real world. Well, the synthetic pictures better honor the central dogma because they're going to interact with the real world, which definitely does. But I don't look down on it at all. That's, perspective is a wonderful thing.
My other question is with regard to your statements about AI being able to represent actors. I worked in motion pictures for 20 years in LA before I moved up here. And so I was doing that on the set every day. And how do you see AI not being able to represent actors, especially with the intriguing actors contract thing right now regarding AI?
Well, I mean, AIs aren't intelligent.
No, but...
I mean, people are trying to make the leap that they are, but they aren't. And you look at a large language model, and basically it's using massive statistics to figure out what the next syllable is going to be based on the preceding so many syllables. That's just a statistical thing. It's not. It doesn't mean that the thing that issued the statement is intelligent. It doesn't mean that at all.
That makes sense.
And it looks like we have a question right behind you as well.
So just to take a couple of things that you said in your talk and mash them together and reflect them back to you. You said that animators and actors do the same thing. You said that we're surfing the wave of Moore's Law, and we've seen the advances of photorealistic renderings in CGI. Do you see a future where actors and actresses actually no longer exist and they're simply animations?
I think that's the same. That's the religion that I call the singularity. We will finally get to the point where humans aren't necessary anymore, and I can see why people think that, and that might happen. But there's no path that I can imagine following that gets us there. The reason I was always interested in AI was because I want to know how this works. It's the most interesting thing in the world. This. How does the brain work? How do we humans work? And I've been looking at it all my life, and I still haven't got much of a clue. Like, what's consciousness, for example? Is there somebody sitting around, a smart computer scientist, that's got an AI that somehow is going to answer that question? Not that I see. A lot of them claim they do, but I think they're believers in this religion, the singularity religion. I'll call it briefly. But it's a religion. If you can't figure out how to get there, it's a leap of faith, and that's a religion.
So we're just about out of time. I just wanted to do a final question myself. You talked about how the pixel was really the first time we've been able to separate the art from the medium. And at this point, there's more imagery, more art that's pixel related than there is not. Do you see that there's any concern about us losing so much of our art because it's no longer physically attached to a media or medium of some kind?
Well, that's kind of interesting. Does the medium matter fundamentally? I can come at it several ways. Like I started off with the cave painting from Altamira. By the way, Altamira was the name of my second company. You're not allowed in Altamira Cave because human breath is destroying the paintings. Nobody would see those pictures if you had to see them realized in their original medium, right? So removal of those pictures from the medium seems really important if the rest of us start to appreciate it. And there's nothing really special about those rocks, I think. I mean, other than the fact that it exists and it's so old, that's important to the image. But that's a fascinating question. We're so new to this. We only, like I said, it's just 2000 roughly, plus or minus 5. When we were able to just forget about the medium. Maybe we're too soon to have a strong opinion. But you're going to get me thinking about it a little bit there. I think people are already to the point where they don't need a medium anymore. The bit is it. The pixel is it, right? Unless you like the smell or something. And I can imagine that actually being true. By the way, in music, in audio, I was surprised that there's no name for their sample. They use the same theory as we use in pictures. We call our sample the pixel. What's the sample called in audio? It's not called a sample because a sample in audio means you've grabbed a piece of somebody else's. Okay. So I found it very awkward in my book not to have a name, so I invented one. I hope you like it. Soxel. A pixel is a picture element. A soxel is a sonic element. Okay?
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it's very useful. I just can't believe there's not one. I'm the first person to need a word for that. Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you very much for having an opportunity to sit down and talk with us and give a presentation this evening. So, quick round of applause. Thank you. And again, Alvy is going to be located out here shortly. There's going to be some books set up that you can purchase. The Biography of the Pixel. I picked mine up a couple weeks ago. I'm most of the way through the first chapter. It's a really good, he actually, when we were talking in Zoom before setting this all up, he mentioned that it's written for the intelligent layperson, which was a phrase I had not heard before, but I am stealing. And that really is a good way to describe the book. It's not ridiculously heavy in the mathematics. It has a nice kind of historical background and is almost a pixel appreciation style book. So I would recommend taking a look at it. But he will be available also to sign your copies if you decide to pick up a copy this evening.
I'd love to sign your copies.
Thank you all.